The restaurant glowed with gold light. Every table, a stage, every guest, a performance. Then a quiet man in a plain gray coat stepped through the door, and his shoe caught the hem of a long silk dress. Clara Whitmore turned her eyes cutting through him like glass. "Did your mother not teach you any manners?" The room froze, and every conversation died. He didn't argue, didn't explain. He only stood there calm as still water. But no one in that room knew the truth. The man they were mocking could destroy every life inside it. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Clara Whitmore stood with one hand still holding the fabric of her dress, waiting for the apology she believed she was owed. She was used to rooms bending toward her. Her family's name had shaped half the boardrooms in the city, and her face had appeared in enough glossy magazines to make strangers whisper when she walked past. Tonight, she had come to this restaurant because a private dining table had been held under her name for weeks, and because she wanted to be seen. Adrian Cole lifted his eyes slowly and met hers. He was taller than most men in the room, but there was nothing sharp about the way he stood. His coat was plain. His shoes were clean, but worn at the heel. He looked like a man who had walked a long way to get here and was in no hurry to prove anything to anyone. He gave a small nod, the kind that carried weight without noise, and said, "I'm sorry. That was my fault. That was all. No flattery, no stammering. No hint that he recognized who she was or why she mattered." Clara blinked once, waiting for something more, and when it didn't come, heat rose under her collar. A woman at the nearest table lifted a napkin to cover her smile. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass clinked against marble. The whole room had watched her tear into him, and now the whole room was watching him walk away from it, unbothered. Clara's friend, Vanessa Hart, touched her elbow and whispered something about letting it go. Clara didn't answer. She watched Adrian move through the tables toward a quiet seat near the back window, the one reserved for guests who didn't want company. The hostess, a young woman named Rachel, followed him with 2 menus tucked against her chest, and Clara noticed something strange. Rachel wasn't nervous the way she should have been with a man who'd just been publicly shamed. She was smiling, not politely, warmly, like she knew him. Clara returned to her table, but her appetite had changed shape. She ordered wine she didn't want, and pushed a fork around a plate of something she didn't taste. Her eyes kept drifting toward the back window. Adrian sat alone. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look at the other diners. He read the menu once, set it down, and stared out at the streetlights with the patience of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be, and no one expecting him anywhere soon. A second server, an older man in a black vest, stopped at Adrian's table on the way to the kitchen. Clara watched from across the room. The server didn't hand him a drink. He leaned down, said something short, and Adrian answered with 2 or 3 words. Then the server stepped back, nodded once, and walked away with a tightness in his shoulders that Clara recognized. It was the tightness of a man who had just been given a direct instruction by someone he respected. Vanessa noticed her staring. "Clara, you're being dramatic. He stepped on your dress. He apologized. It's over." "It's not about the dress," Clara said, though she wasn't sure yet what it was about. She lifted her wine glass and tried to look bored. Across the dining room, the manager of the restaurant, a narrow man in a charcoal suit named Gregory Payne, appeared near the kitchen door. He scanned the room, the way managers do on busy nights, checking for problems, and his eyes stopped when they reached Adrian's table. Something passed across his face that wasn't stress. It was closer to recognition, maybe even deference. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and walked straight to Adrian, slow enough to seem natural, fast enough that Clara noticed. Gregory did not speak loudly. He bent slightly at the waist and spoke with his hands folded in front of him, the way a man speaks to someone he does not want to offend. Adrian answered with a small shake of his head, a half smile, and a word or two that Clara couldn't catch. Gregory straightened, said, "Of course, loud enough this time for the nearest tables to hear," and walked back toward the kitchen with purpose. Clara set her glass down. "Who is that man?" Vanessa turned. "Which man?" "The one in the gray coat, by the window." Vanessa glanced, shrugged, and went back to her plate. "Nobody. Look at him. He's not even dressed for this restaurant." But Clara had stopped listening. She had watched the manager of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city walk across a full dining room to personally greet a stranger in a worn coat, and then walk away as if he had just received an order. Men like Gregory Payne did not do that for nobodies. They did it for people whose names they were afraid to say out loud. She tried to catch Rachel's eye when the hostess passed her table. Rachel gave her a professional smile, the kind that meant she wasn't going to answer any questions. Clara touched her wrist anyway. "Excuse me, the gentleman by the window. Is he a regular here?" Rachel's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "I'm not able to discuss our guests, Miss Whitmore. I hope you understand. I know most of your regulars." "Then I'm sure you'll work it out." Rachel walked off before Clara could press her. It was the politest dismissal Clara had received in a very long time, and from a woman who was supposed to remember her as a VIP. Her cheeks burned again, and this time she was careful not to let it show. She lifted her glass slowly, turned her face back toward her own table, and forced a laugh at something Vanessa was saying. She was no longer eating, no longer performing. She was watching the man by the window, the way a hunter watches a shape moving behind trees. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't raised his status. He had simply existed in that room, with a quiet that didn't match his clothes, and every person who worked in this restaurant seemed to know something she didn't. When Adrian finally stood to leave, he left a folded bill on the table without checking it. Gregory was already at the door. He didn't hand Adrian a coat because Adrian had never taken it off, but he held the door open himself and said, "Have a good night, sir." Not, "Thank you for dining with us." Not, "Please come again." Just, "Have a good night, sir," in the voice of a man who hoped very much that the night would in fact be good. Adrian gave him the same small nod he had given Clara, and then he was gone. Clara sat very still. The dining room slowly remembered itself, conversations picking back up, silverware returning to motion. Vanessa was talking about a trip to Aspen, but the words slid past Clara without landing. She looked down at the hem of her dress at the faint mark where his shoe had caught the fabric, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't embarrassment either. It was the uneasy suspicion that she had just humiliated the wrong person in front of every person whose opinion she cared about, and that she did not yet understand how wrong. She set her napkin on the table, told Vanessa she wasn't feeling well, and asked for the check. By the time she walked out into the cold, Adrian Cole's gray coat was already gone from the street, and Clara Whitmore was no longer the most important person in her own evening. Clara spent the next 3 days pretending she had forgotten his face. She went to meetings. She smiled at photographers outside a charity gala. She ate lunch with her father at the club and laughed when he told a story she had heard before. But every time her phone lit up with a notification, she hoped, without letting herself admit it, that somehow one of her contacts would mention a man in a gray coat. None of them did. So on the 4th morning, she made a call to Vanessa Hart and asked very casually whether anyone in their circle had heard of an Adrian Cole. Vanessa laughed and said the name sounded like a man who sold insurance. Clara laughed too, because that was what she was supposed to do. Then she hung up, sat very still at her kitchen counter, and began searching his name herself. She found almost nothing. A line in an old business article from the late 1990s. A photograph from a charity auction taken from across a room, his face half turned. A single mention in a trade publication about a holdings group called Cole Harbor, listed without contact information. Clara was a woman who could find anyone in less than an hour. Adrian had taken her 3 days of quiet effort and given her almost nothing, and the very scarcity of him told her she had been right to keep looking. She went back to the restaurant that Friday night without a reservation. Gregory Payne saw her at the door, and there was a flicker in his face, a small recalculation before he walked forward and offered her the same table by the window where Adrian had sat. Clara understood the message. She took the table, ordered a drink, and waited. Adrian arrived just after 8. He wore a dark coat this time. Still plain, still clean, still unconcerned. He stopped when he saw her at his usual table. He did not look surprised, and he did not look flattered. He looked like a man being politely inconvenienced by the weather. He walked over anyway and stood beside the empty chair. "May I?" he asked. "I saved it for you," Clara said with the small smile she had practiced in the car. Adrian sat. He did not pick up the menu. Gregory appeared without being called, set down water, and disappeared again. Clara waited for Adrian to speak first, because women like Clara were used to waiting and being rewarded for it. Adrian waited too, and he did not seem to feel the weight of her silence, the way she felt the weight of his. "I wanted to apologize properly," she said at last, because the silence was becoming expensive. "For the other night. I was rude. I had a long week. It wasn't about you." "It's all right," Adrian said. "It's not really. Then it's between you and yourself. I'm not involved." Clara's smile tightened. She had expected gratitude. She had expected at worst cool forgiveness. She had not expected to be handed back her own apology, as if it were a coat she had left at the door. She reached for her wine and spoke more carefully. "Can I ask what you do, Adrian?" "Things that don't need to be talked about." "That's a very theatrical answer. It's the honest one. I've made it a habit not to know the names of the people who eat in my rooms, and not to let them know mine. It keeps the evenings simple." She studied him. He did not seem to be performing mystery. He did not seem to be flirting. He seemed to be a man who had decided long before meeting her that his life was not available for review. In Clara's world, everyone performed. Everyone leaked information to be admired. A man who did not was either lying or dangerous, and Adrian did not look like he was lying. "You don't like people like me, do you?" she said. "I don't know you. You have an opinion. I have an observation. You lead with your name. Most people do. It tells me where you grew up and who you're afraid of disappointing. That's not the same as knowing you." Clara felt the heat crawl up her neck for the second time in a week. No one had spoken to her that way in years. The strange part was that he had not raised. His voice had not tried to wound her. He had simply told her what he saw with the flat clarity of a man reading the weather. She set her glass down very gently and changed the subject. They spoke about the menu. They spoke about the city. She left the restaurant that night without learning a single new fact about him, and she was angrier than she had been when she walked in. The reveal came 2 weeks later, and it did not come from Adrian. Her father, Richard Whitmore, asked her to sit in on an introductory meeting with a holdings group that wanted to take the Whitmore brand into a new line of boutique hotels. The group was interested in a co-investment, and the preliminary paperwork had already moved through 3 rounds of lawyers. Richard slid a folder across the desk and told her to read it carefully, because he wanted her opinion before the principal joined them. The cover page carried a familiar name, Cole Harbor Holdings. Clara turned the page. On the second sheet under the heading of Principal Stakeholders, she read Adrian Cole's name, and then the list of properties the firm quietly owned, and then the list of restaurants that operated under its umbrella. Her favorite restaurant was on that list. So was the one where she had called him a man, without manners, in front of a room full of strangers. She did not make a sound. She closed the folder, set it back on her father's desk, and asked for a glass of water. Richard did not notice the color leaving her face, because Richard rarely noticed things unless they cost him money. He kept talking about valuations. Clara kept nodding. Inside her chest, something that had been arranged in a neat pattern for 28 years was quietly falling out of order. She did not call Adrian. She told herself it was strategy. She told herself she needed time to think. The truth, which she only half admitted to herself on the drive home that night, was that her pride would not let her be the one to move first. He had let her sit across from him at that table, knowing what he owned, knowing what she had said, and he had let her keep talking. He had not corrected her. He had not embarrassed her. He had simply watched her perform and left her to find out on her own. That was the part she could not forgive. Not him. Herself. The following week, the formal meeting was held in a long conference room on the 42nd floor of her father's building. Richard sat at the head of the table. Clara sat 2 seats to his right in the chair her father had always said would be hers one day. Across from them, the Cole Harbor team arrived in a small group, and Adrian walked in last. He wore a dark suit this time, cut well, still quiet. He did not look at Clara when he sat down. He shook her father's hand, thanked him for his time, and opened a thin leather folder. Clara had rehearsed in the mirror that morning. She had chosen words that were warm, without being weak. She had promised herself she would find a moment between the legal points and the valuation discussion to acknowledge him privately. She would not beg. She would simply let him see that she had understood. And that would be enough, because she believed it had to be. The meeting did not give her that moment. Richard opened by speaking about the Whitmore brand, the way he always did, as if the room were lucky to hear about it. He listed the names of competitors his firm had outmaneuvered over the decades. He made a joke at the expense of a rival developer that had been funny 10 years ago. Clara watched Adrian's face. It did not move. Then Richard turned to her and asked in the casual way he used when he wanted to display her, for her thoughts on the partnership. She spoke carefully. She spoke well, she thought. She said the right things about synergy and brand alignment. She mentioned as a light aside that she had recently dined at one of the group's restaurants and found it charming. She was trying in her own coded way to hand Adrian an opening. Adrian took nothing. When she finished, he thanked her for her comments and turned directly to Richard. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "I appreciate your time and your history. I'm going to be direct. My team reviewed this partnership closely. We've decided not to move forward." Richard smiled the way men like Richard smiled when they thought they had misheard. "I'm sorry. We're passing on the deal. On what grounds? The numbers are clean. The terms were agreed." "The numbers are fine," Adrian said. "The brand isn't. Your brand has been built on who your family refuses to stand next to. That works for some markets. It doesn't work for the hotels we're building. I'm not interested in partnering with a name that treats strangers the way it does when it thinks no one important is watching." The room stopped breathing. Clara felt every word land against her ribs. He had not named her. He had not looked at her. He did not need to. Her father's lawyer began to speak a weak protest about months of due diligence, and Adrian lifted one hand in a small, respectful motion that meant the conversation was over. He closed his folder. He stood. He thanked them again with real courtesy and walked toward the door with his team behind him. Richard turned his head very slowly toward his daughter. He did not speak. He did not need to. His silence in that conference room was louder than Clara's had been in any restaurant. Around the table, men she had known since she was a girl looked anywhere but at her. Her father's chief of staff, a woman named Margaret Shaw, kept her eyes on her notepad, as if writing something urgent, though her pen was not moving. Adrian stopped at the door. He turned back not to Clara but to the room. "I don't hold grudges, Mr. Whitmore. I just know what I buy into. Have a good afternoon." He left. Clara sat very still. She felt the chair beneath her, the cold metal of the table under her fingers, the weight of her own last name pressing down on her shoulders for the first time in her life, as something heavier than a gift. Her reputation in that room had just been rewritten in a single minute, and not one person at the table was going to help her rewrite it back. She rose before her father could speak to her and walked out of the conference room on legs she could barely feel. In the hallway, she caught a reflection in the polished glass of an office door. The woman looking back at her was beautifully dressed, perfectly composed, and for the first time, she could remember entirely alone. Clara did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed with the city glowing behind the glass and her phone dark on the nightstand. She waited for it to ring. She waited for her father to call her. She waited for Vanessa to text something careless and easy that she could pretend to laugh at. None of it came. The only message she received was from Margaret Shaw, brief and professional, asking her to clear her calendar for the rest of the week. By morning, the news had moved through the circles that mattered. She could feel it without being told. 2 invitations were quietly rescinded. A stylist, who usually answered within minutes, took 7 hours to respond. A board seat she had been promised in the spring was suddenly described in polite language as still under discussion. No one said why. No one needed to. In her world, people did not explain when they began to step away from you. They just stepped, and one morning you woke up, and the room you had always stood in the center of was arranged around someone else. Her father asked to see her on Sunday. He did not shout. Richard Whitmore had never shouted at his daughter in her life, and he did not begin now. He sat behind the desk in his study with a cup of black coffee in front of him, and he looked at her, the way he had once looked at a junior partner who had lost a contract. The disappointment in his face was not heated. It was cold, and it was permanent, and Clara understood that she had been reclassified. "I'm not going to ask what you did to that man," Richard said. "I don't want to know. I want you to know that what happened in that conference room happened because of something you did before it. That is the only sentence I'm going to say about this. Are we clear?" "Yes," Clara said. "Good. Take the week. Come back when you're useful." She drove home with her hand steady on the wheel and her eyes burning. She did not cry. She had stopped being the kind of woman who cried in cars by the time she was 19. Instead, she thought the whole long drive about a man in a worn gray coat who had apologized for stepping on her dress and had not once tried to make her pay for anything she had said to him. He had not needed to. She had paid herself. She spent the next 2 days alone in her apartment. She turned down calls. She stopped checking headlines. She walked through her own rooms and saw for the first time how carefully every object in them had been arranged to be seen. The art on the walls, the books on the shelves, the photographs of herself at other people's weddings. Nothing in the apartment had been chosen for her. Everything had been chosen for the idea of her. She sat down on the floor of her living room in a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people earned in a month, and for a long time, she didn't move. On the 3rd day, she wrote Adrian a letter. Not an email, not a text. A letter by hand on plain paper, because anything else felt like another performance. She did not mention the deal. She did not mention her father. She did not ask him to reconsider anything. She wrote that she had spoken to him in public, the way no stranger deserved to be spoken to, and that she had done it because she had been taught for most of her life that her voice mattered more than other people's quiet. She wrote that she had been wrong and that she was not writing to be forgiven because she had not earned that. She was writing because she owed him the words and because saying them only to herself was not enough. She sent the letter through Gregory Payne at the restaurant. She did not know where Adrian lived. She did not try to find out. She handed Gregory a sealed envelope on a Tuesday afternoon and told him with a plainness that surprised her that if Mr. Cole chose not to open it, she would understand. Gregory took the envelope without comment and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and the care in that small gesture told her he would deliver it himself. Adrian read the letter that evening. He did not answer it. Clara had told herself she would not expect an answer, and so she was almost honest with herself when the silence arrived. Almost. She kept her phone close anyway. She watched the city turn from blue to black through her kitchen window and listened to the quiet of her own apartment, and she began for the first time in a long time to sit inside a silence without trying to fill it. A week passed. Then on a gray Thursday afternoon, Gregory called her himself. He did not sound warm, and he did not sound cold. He sounded like a man carrying out an instruction. He told her that Mr. Cole would be at the restaurant that night at 8 at the window table, and that if she wished to speak with him, she was welcome to come. He did not say Adrian had agreed to hear her out. He did not say anything about forgiveness. He simply gave her the time and hung up. Clara arrived at 7:50. She wore a simple coat, no jewelry she did not need, and shoes she could walk in. She had dressed for the first time in years, like a woman who was not trying to be looked at. Rachel greeted her at the door with a small, neutral nod and led her to the window table without ceremony. Adrian was already there. He stood when she reached the table. He did not smile. He did not frown either. He pulled out the chair across from him and sat down only when she had. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for writing," he said. "Most people don't." A server set down water. Clara waited until he left. She had rehearsed nothing for this because rehearsing felt like the old version of her, and the old version of her had cost her enough. She looked at Adrian across the table and spoke plainly. "I'm not here to ask you to change your decision about the partnership. I'm not here for my father. I'm here because what I said to you that night was cruel, and I knew it was cruel while I was saying it. And I said it anyway, because I was used to being able to. That's the part I didn't understand until last week. I wasn't angry about the dress. I was angry that you didn't seem afraid of me." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. The room around them was full, but neither of them noticed it. He turned his water glass 1/4 turn on the table and set his hand back down. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio," he said, in a voice low enough that it belonged only to their table. "My mother cleaned houses until her back gave out. She taught me that the way a man treats a stranger is the only honest thing about him, because he has nothing to gain by being kind. She died before I could buy her a house. I've spent a lot of years making sure nobody who works for me ever speaks to a stranger the way you spoke to me. That's why my staff looked at you the way they did. Not because of who I am, because of who she was." Clara's throat closed. She did not try to speak through it. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," Adrian went on. "It isn't. What you said wasn't about me. It was about every person in that room who didn't look like they belonged there. I've been that person in a lot of rooms for a lot of years, and I stopped pretending it doesn't cost something. So no, I'm not going to forgive you tonight, but I read your letter. Twice, and I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between a person who is sorry they were caught and a person who is sorry they became someone they didn't want to be. You wrote the second letter. That's worth something to me." "Thank you," Clara said. It was the smallest word she had ever used, and it was the first one in a long time that she had meant. They sat with that for a while. Adrian did not order food. Neither did she. After a few minutes, he spoke again more evenly without weight. "I'm not reopening the deal. Not now. Maybe not ever. Your father's brand isn't a problem I can fix by signing something. That's not a punishment. That's just the truth. If your family wants to change how it's seen, it's going to change it the slow way. One room at a time. One stranger at a time. That work isn't mine to do for you." "I understand," Clara said. "I hope so." He stood. He did not offer his hand, because that would have been a transaction, and this had not been one. He looked at her once more, and in that look she did not see warmth, but she saw something she had not expected. A small, careful acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, not friendship. Just the faint level recognition of one human being registering another for the first time as fully real. "Take care of yourself, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Clara," she said quietly. "Take care of yourself, Clara." He walked out the same way he had walked out on the first night, without hurry, without noise, with a manager at the door who held it open for him without being asked. The room did not notice him leave. Clara sat alone at the window table for a long time after he was gone. She did not cry. She did not rush to pay. She sat and she watched the streetlights come on one by one, and for the first time she let the silence belong to her instead of working against her. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved, full of rooms she would have to walk back into, and faces she would have to meet again. She thought about the hem of a silk dress, and a stranger's quiet voice, and the long distance between who she had been and who she was going to have to become. The work ahead of her would not be fast, and it would not be witnessed, and that she was beginning to understand was the point. Respect is not earned by the clothes a person wears, or the name they carry, or the seat they are given at the table. It begins in the first word spoken to a stranger before anyone knows who that stranger will turn out to be.